All right, let's dive into something kind of juicy today. I mean, who hasn't at some point wondered, can you really have it all? The dream career and the blissful marriage.
Yeah, it's like a classic dilemma,
Yeah.
right? And one that keeps popping up no matter how much society changes.
Exactly. So we stumbled across this English learning podcast, and this two speakers went deep on this whole career versus marriage thing.
Really? An English learning podcast?
Yeah, surprising, right? And they had such insightful takes. So we're going to break it all down for you, see if we can glean some wisdom, maybe even some universal truths. What do you think?
Sounds fascinating. I mean, everyone's got to figure out how to balance their own ambitions with their personal lives.
Totally. Okay, so first things first. When's the right time to tie the knot? Like, is there even a right time?
Well, that's where these speakers had different views. One was all about, like, there's no magic number,
Right.
But the other, they were like, hold up. You got to be emotionally and financially ready.
Yeah, it makes sense. No one wants to jump into something that big unless they're truly prepared.
Totally. And they both agreed, like, don't let society pressure you into anything, right?
Absolutely. It's your life, your timeline. So it's about figuring out what being prepared even means for you. Like, what are your own green lights?
That's the million-dollar question. What makes you feel ready personally, practically, and financially?
Okay, so let's say you are ready. Does getting hitched early help or hurt your career goals? What do you think?
Well, one speaker argued that a supportive spouse, like, they can push you to reach higher, motivate you.
Power couple vibes.
Exactly. But on the flip side, the other speaker, they pointed out that early marriage, well, it comes with responsibilities like mortgages, maybe even kids down the line. All that can kind of pull you away from the career climb.
That reminds me of my friend Sarah got married right out of college, and she says it's the reason her career skyrocketed.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they were both super driven, like having that mutual support system. Game changer. They were a team from day one.
That's amazing. And it really underlines how important open communication is and having shared goals. No matter when you get married, those things matter.
100%. Which leads us to, well, the elephant in the room, finances.
Oh, here we go.
Right. This podcast really hit on how financial stability can make a marriage, well, less stressful. Allows couples to build their future without constantly sweating about money.
And I think that's such a crucial point. Like, if you can get financially secure early on, in whatever way that looks for your situation, it can actually free you up to, focus on the relationship itself.
Right. You're not always putting out financial fires.
Exactly. It's being proactive, removing a potential source of conflict down the road.
They did say money isn't everything.
Of course not.
But it's a pretty big piece of the puzzle when you're building a strong foundation.
Agreed. So I'm curious, for you, how does financial security play into your vision of a successful marriage? Is it like a non-negotiable, a bonus, something you're working towards together?
It's definitely a question worth asking yourself right
Yeah.
now. This is where it got really interesting for me. They talked about cultural differences, and wow, it really opens your eyes to how varied these perspectives can be.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
Well, I mentioned how in some cultures, marriage is like the priority, even over finances.
Interesting.
Right. And then in others, it's like, whoa, hold up. Gotta have your finances sorted before even thinking about marriage.
Yeah, you see that a lot too. It makes you realize there's no one right way to approach this whole thing. Like, so much is shaped by where you come from.
Totally. It made me think about my own upbringing. Like, how did that shape my views?
Yeah, how have those cultural norms or family expectations, influenced you?
It's
Yeah.
definitely something to ponder. Okay, switching gears a bit. They talked about career-oriented versus family-oriented mindsets. One speaker even suggested that some folks who are super career-driven might not even be that interested in marriage. Period.
Oh, wow. Taking a strong stance there.
Right. And they even brought up these demanding fields like medicine, entrepreneurship, the big corporate world.
Those are some pretty high pressure careers. So yeah, I can see how those could make relationships challenging, to say the least.
Yeah. But I mean, just because someone's laser focused on their career doesn't automatically mean they're like anti-marriage.
Absolutely not. There are plenty of people who manage to make both work. It's about finding that sweet spot.
And that sweet spot, I'm guessing, involves
Compromise.
bingo. They both agreed that compromise is pretty much inevitable if you want to rock both a stellar career and a happy marriage.
Yeah, that makes sense. But how much compromise is too much? And when is it worth it?
Right. There's got to be some nuance to that, right?
Right. Definitely. It's not always black and white. Maybe that's something we can unpack a bit further.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring how compromise plays out in different stages of life and all that.
Totally. Let's dive into those details.
Okay, so compromise. It's like that magic word, right? But how do you even know what a good compromise looks like?
Right. Like how much is too much, and when do you just gotta stick to your guns?
Exactly. And how does that change as you move through different phases of life?
Well, one thing they said that really clicked for me was that those compromises, they can actually shift over time.
Yeah. I never thought about it like that.
Right. So early on in your career, maybe you do have to go all in, long hours, tons of networking, gotta hustle.
Makes sense.
But then as your family grows, those priorities might naturally shift, and that's totally okay.
So it's not about finding this perfect static balance. It's more about, embracing the ebb and flow.
Exactly. It's like riding the waves, right? You gotta adapt.
And sometimes, I guess, those compromises, they can feel like sacrifices.
Yeah.
Especially when you're faced with a really tough choice.
Oh, absolutely. But those are the moments, where communication is key.
Right. Gotta talk it out. Speaking of tough choices, they brought up this super interesting example. What if someone dreams of being a CEO? Top of their game.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Lots of responsibility, long hours, travel.
Exactly.
Right.
How do you balance that kind of ambition with, having a family life?
That's a great example because those high pressure roles, they often require a different level of compromise, not just from the person in that role, but from their partner too.
So it becomes a team effort.
For sure. They both got to be willing to adapt. The speakers threw out some practical strategies, though, for making it work. Maybe weeknight dinners are a no-go, but weekends, strictly family time.
Oh, I like that. Protect those weekends.
Right. Or even if you can't always be physically present, you got to make sure the time you do have together is quality time. No phones, no distractions, just connection.
It's about being present and intentional. Not just physically there, but mentally checked out.
100%. And honestly, even little things can make a difference. A quick call, a thoughtful text during the day, just those little check-ins can go a long way.
It's the little things that count. Now, something else that stood out to me was how they talked about different people having different capacities.
Yeah.
For managing all these demands.
Oh yeah, for sure. Some people thrive in those high pressure environments. They can juggle it all, no problem. Others, not so much.
Right. It's we all have different strengths, weaknesses, and levels of resilience.
It's about knowing yourself, right? And not comparing yourself to how someone else does things.
Absolutely. What works for your bestie might not work for you.
Right. And it's not just about individual capacity either. It's about the demands of your job, your family situation. Like some careers just have less flexibility built in.
That's true. Like a surgeon or a CEO, those are pretty demanding roles. Maybe not a ton of wiggle room in the schedule.
Exactly. Whereas someone who works remotely or has more control over their hours might have an easier time juggling things.
Which is why it's so important to choose a career path that, actually aligns with what you want out of life.
I couldn't agree more. Like, if you know family time is going to be a priority, maybe don't go for that job that's notorious for 80-hour weeks.
Right. Sometimes the choice is obvious. But even if you do end up in a demanding role, there are ways to negotiate, advocate for more flexibility, set boundaries.
Totally. It's about being proactive and knowing what you need. One of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole conversation is that there's no magical formula, no set of rules.
Yeah, if only it were that simple.
Right, but it's about recognizing that there are tons of different paths to success in your career, in your marriage, and life.
It's about finding what works for you and your partner, being adaptable, and making those conscious choices that, reflect what you truly value.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Oh, but they did bring up one other thing that's worth mentioning. The unique challenges that women face in this whole debate.
Oh, right. They pointed out how there's often more pressure on women to, put marriage and family first.
Yeah, it's like this added layer of complexity, and it goes back to those societal expectations and gender roles that are still so ingrained.
It's a good reminder that these aren't just personal decisions. It's all happening within this larger societal context.
Absolutely. And being aware of those external influences can help you make choices that feel, authentic to you, not just what someone else thinks you should be doing.
It's wild, right? Who knew an English learning podcast could spark such a deep conversation?
I know, it just goes to show you these big life questions. They're universal. We're all figuring it out as we go.
And there's so many different ways to make it work. So let's bring it back to the original question. Can you truly have both a fulfilling career and a happy marriage? What was their final verdict?
They didn't give a simple yes or no, which I think is, pretty realistic. Life's complicated.
Exactly. It's not always black and white.
But they did stress one thing, this one crucial ingredient for success in both marriage and career. You ready for it?
Hit me with it.
Communication. Open and honest communication.
Oh, here we go again. Communication is key.
Right. But seriously, it's not just about logistics and schedules. It's about dreams, fears, those evolving priorities we were talking about.
Really being on the same page, understanding where your partner's coming from.
Exactly. And being on the same page doesn't mean having identical goals.
Right.
It's about understanding and respecting each other's aspirations, even if that means you have to, adapt and compromise along the way.
Because let's be real, those compromises, they can be tough. That's why it's so important to have those honest conversations up front. And not just up front, but throughout the relationship.
Yeah, it's an ongoing dialogue, not a one-time thing. And honestly, sometimes it might even mean bringing in some outside support. Oh, interesting.
Right, like a therapist, a counselor,
yeah,
even a mentor. Someone who can help you navigate those tougher conversations.
Yeah, makes sense. Sometimes an outside perspective can be super helpful. Okay, so to wrap this whole thing up, what are we taking away from this deep dive?
Well, for me, it's that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's about finding what works for you, your partner, your unique situation, and being flexible. Life throws curveballs, right?
Always.
So be adaptable.
Yeah.
And keep that communication flowing.
Love it. But wait, you're not gonna let us off that easily, are you? You always have that that one last thought-provoking question.
Oh, you know me too well. Okay, so remember that CEO example. Let's say that's you.
Yeah.
You're driven, ambitious, you want to be at the top of your game.
Yeah.
How would you balance that level of commitment with a fulfilling family life?
Oh, good one.
Right. What would you be willing to compromise on? And where would you find support to make it all work?
Something to think about for sure. And hey, maybe the answer changes over time. That's part of the journey, right? Exactly. It's a constant evolution. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But we want to hear from you. How do you approach this whole marriage and career balancing act?
Share your stories, your insights, your struggles. We're all in this together, right? Thanks for joining us.